Chapter 1567. If this forward thrust was an accident, then Onyxia's next move was the second accident. In a battle between giant creatures, most of the time, it would be the most violent. You attack me, I attack you. It was a battle to see who could endure it first, or who could catch the opponent's flaw and give them a fatal blow. There were very few gigantic creatures that could play tricks as well as Onyxia. Facing the black dragon's forward thrust, Corellon was surprised but not panicked. He waved his free left hand and punched the dragon's claw. The skin and muscles of the giant's arm were as hard as steel, and his left arm, which was originally wearing a bracer, was wrapped in rings and rings of solid iron chains. This formed a double layer of protection, so he was not worried about being hurt by the dragon's claws. At that moment, the female black dragon made an unimaginable move. She suddenly flapped her wings and made a hovering motion. Its claws, which were supposed to be attacking fiercely, merely touched the giant's left arm like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. Then the entire dragon somersaulted backwards, revealing its belly. More importantly, its long and violent tail, which was full of beauty, swept towards the giant's left knee at lightning speed. Even if the black dragon princess had shrunk to the size of a human, her tail was still an extremely sharp weapon. To say that it was a meteor hammer would be an understatement. Driven by the strong and developed tail muscles, the destructive power of the dragon's tail was at least hundreds of tons. This power could easily split mountains and stones, lifting something heavy as though it were light, and then unleashing a thunderous strike. The guardian giant, who was not known for its speed, was hit on the spot. Crack. It was the crisp sound of bones fracturing. Even with the guardian's thick skin and flesh, having his leg broken was the only possible outcome after suffering a heavy blow to his joints. This was not the end. The sharp spike at the end of the dragon's tail directly hooked into Corellon's flesh. Onyxia, who knew very well that she could not be caught, tried her best to pull away the flesh from Corellon's injured part. A small piece of broken kneecap, along with a large fragment of the cruciate ligament, was pulled out by the dragon's tail. Ah! The giant let out a tragic roar and the ferocious giant rushed over, trying to catch the black dragon's tail. But at this moment Onyxia actually used flash. It was something similar to a flashbang. There was no real lethality, but the film on the dragon's eye could filter this strong light very well. Corellon, who was caught off guard, was slightly shaken. The black dragon, who already had some room to spare, immediately turned around and retreated. That strike just now definitely had the demeanor of an assassin. Once the strike succeeded, he immediately fled. Despicable. Is this the power of a dragon aspect? Corellon roared as he squatted down, clutching his leg in pain. I've said it before. I'm an evil dragon. It's just that you don't believe me. The ridicule on the dragon's face became even more intense. After destroying Corellon's leg with one move, Onyxia was not satisfied. She quickly launched a second round of attacks. This time, in theory, Corellon had caught her attack trajectory, but when his left hand caught the dragon's tail, he found that he caught nothing. Mirror image, even Pharaoh, who was able to reach the Morning Star realm, knew a small spell. Everyone thought that dragons only liked to use their innate abilities and elements, but this was actually a misunderstanding. For example, Krasis, this unusual dragon, was an all-round great mage. Onyxia was good at playing with fire, but she did not only know fire magic. She was also good at using arcane magic. With such a small trick, she seized the second opportunity and swung her tail again, directly smashing the entire area near Corellon's right collarbone. Even the muscles of the shoulder were torn apart. That was all. Corellon had underestimated the shamelessness of the black dragon. Onyxia actually took out a large bottle from her space bag and smashed it on Corellon's wound. This was one of the newest products of the Alliance, named sulfuric acid by Duque himself. Well, of course it was not as awesome as the acid of her dead father, Nesario, but it could be mass-produced. The strong corrosive pain made Corellon jump up. The battle had officially entered the rhythm that Onyxia liked. 5 minutes later, in the depths of the Alcafon's treasury, Onyxia's dragon roar reached the door. Duque and Jaina looked at each other strangely. It was obvious that this female dragon had won, because dragons who were in a fierce battle would not have the time to use the dragon's roar as a song, let alone the tune of Ode to Joy. Feeling the changes in the elements in the air, Duque was speechless. This unmotivated female dragon definitely did not win with the purpose of testing herself. The second to win was Vashj. This was not unexpected. The 4 guardians of the Alcafon's treasury were demigod bodies to begin with, and with the blessing of specific elements, their true strength was not too strong. Among the 4 challengers, Vashj had always been the strongest. Onyxia was only a demigod body, and Vashj was a true demigod, which was already a lot stronger. As a true demigod, it took Vashj so much time to win, proving that she had really won this battle with the goal of honing herself. Onyxia returned smugly, enjoying Duque's eye roll. Vashj came back a little pathetically, but what she got was a smile from Duque. "Thank you for your reminder, Master. I'm even more aware of my own shortcomings. As expected, the frost element is the direction of my development." Vashj returned to her human form and bowed deeply to Duque. "It's good that you understand." Vashj might be a wizard, and she was very good at using the wind element's lightning. The 4 elements of Azeroth were earth, water, fire, and wind. In the end, the element that was most suitable for her was still water. This was inseparable from her 10,000 years of life at the bottom of the sea. She was born here and grew up here. Giving up her talent attribute just to increase her lightning power was like throwing a watermelon to pick a sesame seed. Vashj understood, and Duque was happy for her. "Only those 2 left," Jaina said softly. "No, Shorty's side is just like that. He won't lose if he should win, and he won't win if he should lose. Once Magni accumulates enough, he will naturally win. There are no surprises. I'm only worried about Sylvanas. Because there's only a fine line between her victory and defeat." Duque was right. A duel between 2 earth element experts was actually very boring. Although it wasn't a fight between noobs, the 2 of them didn't have many moves. Rock Guardian Alcafan was a giant with the same body size as Kolalan. The only difference was his accessories. His right hand and legs had been replaced with something that looked like a meteor hammer, full of protrusions. Chapter 1568. Whenever Alcavan used skills like Trample or Heavy Leap, he would often deal terrifying damage to enemies that were smaller than him. This time his enemy was a little different. Magni was a god descending to the mortal world, but it was a god descending in a special form. He completely released the restrictions of his body, allowing the earth element to enter his body without limit. If it was any other race, this would be asking for death. The dwarves were a little special. The bold and courageous dwarves were an ancient race. They originated from the earth spirits created by the titans in the early world using stones with vitality. Due to a disease known as the curse of flesh and blood, the dwarves' earth spirit ancestors went through a metamorphosis. Their stone hide became soft skin. In the end, these bodies of flesh and blood called themselves dwarves, and they established the powerful iron furnace castle on the snow-covered peak of Cosmodan. In a sense, dwarves were not pure living beings. They were more like half-living beings, half-elemental beings. After countless generations of inheritance and mutation, what people saw was a side of dwarves made of flesh and blood. The dwarves with the purest bloodline and the most astonishing talent could trace back to their earth spirit characteristics. For example, Magni Bronzebeard. Absorbing large amounts of earth element was a very risky method. If he absorbed an impure amount of earth element or too much, he would explode like a balloon. The result was out of his and Alcavan's expectations. His affinity with the earth element was very high. It was rare in the world. Alcavan was 8 stories tall, and after Magni absorbed the earth element that Alcavan had released, he was also 6 stories tall. Alcavan's body was rather well proportioned. Magni's horizontally developed body was still very comical even if he turned into a giant. At this time, Magni was very glad that Duque had agreed to give him Savra's Balrog Ragnaro's hand. Only a warhammer like this, which could be enlarged or shrunk by filling or reducing elements, was the most suitable weapon for him. Otherwise, even though he had grown so big, his weapon was still the one he had when he was more than a meter tall. It would be too small to even pick his teeth with. Looking at the blazing inferno hammer, Alcafan frowned. "Originally, I hated all intruders, but you should be an exception because you have a relatively pure heart of the earth. Seems that I was wrong." Completely understanding the meaning behind the other party's gaze, Magni replied loudly, "No, you didn't see wrong. My heart is indeed with the earth." Archavon tapped the infernal hammer with his left finger. "Explain?" "Mother Earth bears all things. Without the earth there would be no atmosphere. Liquid water, real wind, and prairie fire could not exist in the void. The earth was the foundation of all things. Since it's the foundation, then any changes are reasonable." Duque had brainwashed Magni for so many years, and had imbued him with a lot of scientific knowledge about transmigrators. Even if Magni didn't learn everything, he would at least know about 70 to 80% of it. Magni was actually very logical when it came to his theories. Originally, he did not expect this ancient giant, who had lived for at least 25,000 years, to understand. Who would have thought? Well said. Then you understand why this place is called Archifen's Treasury and not some other treasury, right? Book 6 Chapter 17. 3 Book 6 F***CK. There was actually such a thing? Seeing Magni's dumbfounded expression, Alcaphon was very satisfied. Come, don't waste time. Regardless of victory or defeat, you and I will have a long duel. Let's hope there are no other existences to interfere. I can sense a very powerful demigod entering the treasury. Azeroth, the newly promoted demigod of the Weave, Duke Marcus, is a true guardian. He must have his reasons for attacking this treasury, Magni insisted. I hope so. The two giants, one tall and one short, began to fight just like that. To be honest, a duel between earth element experts was rather boring. Low attack speed, almost no technique to speak of. Basically, you give me a blow, I'll give you a blow. The one who could not take it first would fall. If it wasn't for the fact that the two of them could use techniques like jump slash, and when they jumped, they were like two small mountains playing bumper cars in the sky. Duke, who was secretly watching them, would have probably fallen asleep from boredom. Duque turned his attention to Sylvanas and Storm Warden Amarin. The biggest difference between Amarin and the other Storm Wardens was the bright blue runes on his body that were wrapped in circles. These typical Titan runes had the most primitive wind element power. With just a thought, Amarin could easily summon wind and lightning at a designated place. Although each of the runes looked simple, such as the one on his arm, which looked like the word big, but had its head cut off, each Titan rune was actually made up of more than 100,000 tiny runes. The mysterious light inside them rippled and moved continuously. Every time a rune was activated, it was made up of 100,000 tiny runes that were arranged in different ways. The mystery contained within was something that all the mages in the Dalagen would not be able to understand in their entire lives. Amarin looked at Queen Sylvanas, who walked into the hall with Solidar Wrath of the Stars in her hand and revealed an amused expression. Very interesting. You invaders are not here purely for the treasure, but to challenge yourselves. This is the most interesting thing I've seen in the 25,000 years I've guarded the treasury. Gently bending the bow, Sylvanas revealed a stern expression. Sylvanas Windrunner, I'm here to break through my limits. Do you understand the meaning of failure? Amarin asked with a booming voice. Sylvanas lowered her head slightly. At this moment, in her mind, there was the Long Song forest that was burned by the Beastmen, Silvermoon City that was destroyed under the iron hooves of the Calamity Army, the Sunwell that was trampled wantonly over and over again. Orgrim, Arthas killed Jaden. When she raised her head again, there was an unparalleled determination in her eyes. Yes, I understand. It's because I know how terrifying failure is that I understand the value of success. Very well, come on. A battle between people of the same element was much simpler, more violent and direct than fighting against experts of other elements. There was no probing and there were not too many twists and turns. After reaching a certain level of strength, there would be so-called convergence. Why did so many fighter aircrafts in Duze's previous transmigration have similar appearances? It was because there were only a few methods that followed a certain pattern. In the face of such transcendental power, the form and performance of power would be completely different. Chapter 1569. A strong gust of wind blew. The blue Titan runes on Imaron's body flashed, and a level 12 typhoon tornado appeared. The violent storm made Imaron's huge body look blurry. After all, Queen Sylvanas was only 20 meters away from this 8-story tall giant. Mortal, since you have chosen to challenge yourself and pursue the path of the divine realm, then use your body to feel the greatness of the storm. The giant's rumbling voice completely merged with the thunder. Dark clouds of unknown origin shrouded the entire dome of the hemispherical hall. It was dark and frightening. What made Queen Sylvanas' expression turn even colder was that she suddenly realized that she had lost almost all of her attacks. Arrows would be skewed the moment they left the bow. Bow techniques and parabolas were useless. This was the pure suppression of the elemental domain. Unless she made a breakthrough in the elemental domain, Amarin was an existence that she could not defeat. Retreat, retreat, and retreat again. The evasion ability that rangers were proud of was meaningless in the face of this wide-area damage. The frail bodies of elves could only perish if they were pulled into the storm. Tisk! Queen Sylvanas spat on the ground. The range of the tornado continued to expand as Amalron laughed heartily. At the beginning it only occupied the center of the hall, and now it became a large circle. At the beginning Queen Sylvanas had a circle to move around, but in the end, it became a narrow line. Of course she could leave the hall the way she came, but to her that would be the worst failure. She could dodge, she could retreat, but she could not escape. Because this was her path, her heart of the strong and her final stubbornness. Originally, she could have been a salary thief like before the incident at the Dark Portal. Even if she became a queen, she could have become a pure politician. She could even hide in Duque's arms and be a happy little woman. Anyway, she had her sister and Duque, who could be her umbrella to shield her from the wind and rain. I chose this path myself. It was as if she was mocking herself, but also like some sort of self-hypnosis. After saying this, Sylvanas was filled with the spiritual light of a martyr. Duque, who was watching from afar, felt worried, not to mention the Windrunner sisters who were watching this scene in Karazhan. For a moment, Aurelia had the urge to call Duque over to save her sister. However, she saw Duque clenching his fists and gritting his teeth. At this time, Windsor held her hand and shook her head. Second sister chose the path. Both us and Duque can only support her. She's not a canary in a cage, but a petrel soaring in the storm. Yes. Aurelia nodded heavily, her eyes filled with tears. On the other side, Sylvanas moved. He didn't have any attacking stance. He didn't even take his newly acquired divine bow, which was the envy of all the Alliance's hunters and rangers. Instead, he jumped into the storm with a graceful diving posture. In the eyes of the spectators, this was undoubtedly like a moth flying into a flame and courting death. The Windrunner sisters lowered their heads, not daring to watch. Even Lor, Themar and Hadgeron, who were far away in Sindorii, were mentally prepared to lose their queen. Duque had even taken out the divine artifact Atish, and opened a short-distance teleportation portal. However, at this moment when everyone was watching, a sonorous and powerful female voice came out from the strong wind. Don't look down on me. My surname is Wind. Fine. Swordsman. Almost everyone who was watching the battle through Duque's magician's eyes had the same reaction. First shock, then joy. In the magic mirror, Sylvanas's performance shocked the mortals. Her seemingly thin body actually spun at high speed with the whirlwind. That was a speed that was many times more brutal than being thrown into a washing machine. How many revolutions per minute? The mortals' eyes couldn't keep up with Queen Sylvanas' rotation at all. Even the rangers with the strongest eyesight could only keep up with her shadow. 50 revolutions? 100 revolutions. In any case, apart from Duque, no one could count it clearly. Everyone only saw Duque retract Atish, and they instantly understood what it meant. The surnames in this world were different from before Duque transmigrated. In the original world, Mitarai represented where one was born. The surname Azeroth often represented bloodline. The Sunstrider played with fire. And the Windrunner naturally walked on the wind. But no one expected the power of the Windrunner family's bloodline to have such an astonishing upper limit. The Night Elves originated from the part of the Trolls that had the most talent in elemental magic. The High Elves were the most talented in magic among the Night Elves. In order to maintain the magic talent of the next generation, in the past 8,000 years, the High Elves had used all kinds of methods to maintain the purity of their bloodline. For example, mages above the Radiant Moon level could only marry a Radiant Moon level. That was why the Silver Moon Council, a behemoth whose power, interests and bloodline were all intertwined, was formed. Even the king couldn't fight against it. Elves who lost their ability to cast spells were seen as inferior, which was why the various ranger families that didn't have a high status in Kuel Salis came into being. The current Sylvanas could no longer be called a simple ranger. The surging wind elemental energy on her body could be clearly felt even through the magic mirror. Because the wind had changed color. The wind in Amalron was grayish-white, and now the places that Queen Sylvanas flew at high speed had turned purplish-black. Duque froze in shock. His gaze turned to the lightning that kept flashing in the clouds above the hall's dome. The lightning that seemed fine to outsiders was actually engaged in a shocking battle of attrition. Duque was a little unfamiliar, but he still recognized this method. When Gavin Rad obtained the Wind Sword, the Wind Prince Sandran had used it. This meant that Sylvanas, who seemed to be at a disadvantage, was directly mobilizing the lightning power in the clouds. This was definitely not the power of mortals. The others couldn't even see Queen Sylvanas' figure clearly, but with the help of the system, Duque could clearly see that there was a purple emblem that resembled lightning reflected in Sylvanas' eyes. It was flashing and was wrapped in a dim, tornado-like radiance. Amalron, who sensed that something was wrong, began to pay attention to Sylvanas. An extremely uneasy feeling enveloped him. That feeling was too distant, and he didn't know how many years ago, a great existence with the same terrifying aura had almost blown him into ashes with one blow. Chapter 1570. Amalron had once thought that the Titans were omnipotent. The greatest Titan had to create something that was the greatest. Clearly, this deep-rooted understanding that he had held onto for 25,000 years was completely broken at this moment. When the Titans of the Pantheon first descended on planet Azeroth, it was during the most terrifying period of the Dark Empire. At that time there were trolls, mantis demons, bugmen, but there were no elves. But now, a descendant of an obviously mutated subspecies actually displayed a stronger control of the wind element than him, a first-generation Titan's creation. How could he accept this? Sylvanas' rotation with the tornado was getting slower and slower, because this meant that even the wind that Amalron had created was gradually being controlled by her. Be it shock or admiration, as the guardian of the storm that controlled the source of the wind element, Amalron had no obligation to continue supporting the enemy. Very soon the storm stopped. But Queen Sylvanas was suspended in mid-air. It was a powerful yet miniature tornado that was supporting her. Her long, slender and beautiful legs were completely wrapped in the swirling black wind, and there were even lightning snakes flickering in the wind from time to time. Her brilliant golden hair had turned silver at some point, and then it was faintly dyed purple in the glow of the lightning. This is a pleasant surprise. Duke's face finally blossomed into a smile. Second sister, she, Aurelia and Windsor said in unison, "How is she?" Duque smiled as he read out the description of Queen Sylvanas in the system vision. "Of course she is, the demigod of the Azeroth wind, Sylvanas Windrunner. She's a little weak. Second sister is indeed the strongest among us sisters." Windsor raised her nose. "Duque, that last comment of yours is a little redundant." The sisters, whose blood was thicker than water, had single-handedly broken through the boundary between mortals and gods. In the face of such a heaven-defying achievement, Duke actually made such an evaluation. No matter how good Illyria's temper was, she was a little angry now. What else could Duque say? He could only smile bitterly. At that moment, the will of planet Azeroth had responded and accepted Queen Sylvie as the planet's demigod. If what Sylvanas requested from the world was an empty domain, she would definitely be able to obtain even more resources. Unfortunately, her demigod oath was just wind. Just like when Duque was a demigod of the weave, he had to fight with Ragnaros for control of the fire element. By doing this, Queen Sylvanas was going against the big boss of the wind elemental circle, wind wielder Al'Akir. Yes, the Prince Thunderin who gave Gavin Rad the Wind's word was his son. Although in the original history, Sylvanas deserved to be taught a lesson and was eventually beaten like a dog by the Alliance and Horde, the two sides had yet to come into contact with each other, so it was impossible for Sylvanas to obtain many wind elemental resources. Apart from the small amount of wandering wind elements, none of the wind elements were willing to listen to her. So in a sense, the current Queen Sylvie was only the weakest of demigods. Duque shrugged. "Well, let us congratulate Her Excellency Sylvanas Windrunner. She has successfully stepped into the realm of gods. From this moment on, as long as Azeroth is not destroyed, she will be an eternal existence." The so-called eternal was the true meaning of immortality. Just like the wild demigod Malorn, who had been killed by Archimonde in the ancient war, as long as the time was right and there was enough energy and the corresponding summoning ritual, he could still be resurrected for you to see. His own woman had broken through to the level of demigod with her own strength. Even if she was the weakest, at least this spirit was worthy of celebration. Duque was still watching, but his mood had changed from the initial nervousness to relaxed and joyful. If 99 out of 100 people had to die, and only one survived, it would be called a grand escape. If the 99 people who died and the one who survived could all start over, it would be called a game. Different starting points meant different mentalities. Dooku and the other onlookers had already gone from feeling as if they were experiencing it themselves, to being onlookers. Of course, Queen Sylvanas was Queen Sylvanas. She was arrogant and unyielding, and she persisted to the end. Whether it was in the past or now, whether it was in the original history or this life, nothing had changed. Perhaps, it was because of her dazzling moments that she had earned such an exaggerated amount of popularity among the players. Amalron had already retracted his storm elements, because if more elements floated outside his body, it would be no different from giving support to the enemy. Unfortunately, he was a bit late. Even without knowing much, just by looking at the size of the elemental domains surrounding Queen Sylvanas and Amalron in the magic mirror, one could judge the difference in their strength. Although Queen Sylvanas' strength had increased qualitatively, in terms of quantity, Amalron still had the upper hand. Now, the ratio of the black thunder and wind and the grayish-white tornado in the field of view was 3-7. Queen Sylvanas had just stepped into the realm of gods, and she was greedy for all the wind elements that could be converted into her power. She, who had not fired a single arrow since the start of the battle, turned the tables, and starlight flashed on Solidar's stars of fury. Every time it flashed, it was like a vacuum arrow suddenly traversing the entire sky and landing in those seemingly nonsensical places. Only Duque exclaimed, "Beautiful! Duque, why did you say that second sister did a beautiful job?" Sasha directly sent a magic message to Duque. Normal people can't see it, but if your elemental senses are strong enough, you can see that those are Amalron's wind elemental control nodes. Duque smiled and replied, "Destroying the other party's control points means that the other party can release the elements they control, and then both parties can fight again to determine the ownership." It was unrealistic to bring all the elements in the airspace under one's control. After all, the purest elements that were like arms would always only be a small handful. The most standard way for an elemental controller to control the elemental energy in a wide area was to use a single point to control the elemental energy in a spherical area, then connect all the points into lines, and then the lines into a structure like a tree's roots, finally controlling the direction of all the branches on the main trunk. What Sylvanas was doing now was to cut off the other party's roots so that he could more fairly snatch the elemental energy from the wind elemental realm. "Mortal, you're not bad. You're really not bad. But what about this?" Amalron raised his arms high, and the Titan runes on his body, shoulders, and thighs all shone with a dazzling light. The next moment, countless lightning chains shot out from the tips of his 10 fingers. Obviously, when the elemental nodes could not be hidden, this Guardian of Storm directly used the method of strengthening them to deal with Sylvanas's attacks one by one. Chapter 1571. As long as Sylvanas' vacuum arrow hit Amalron's elemental node, it would produce a great suction force and destroy the structure of the wind elemental energy there. However, this storm giant had directly used chain lightning to strengthen it, which meant that these nodes were directly under his control, and there was no possibility of them collapsing. But at this moment, Queen Sylvanas laughed instead of being angry. For a moment, Duque almost thought that he was looking at a female fox with the surname Proudmoore. The arrows of Solidar Wrath of the Stars were infinite. As long as the user still had spiritual power to pour in, it could infinitely gather the light of the stars, forming arrows that could be shot out like lightning. Queen Sylvanas seemed to have increased the number of vacuum arrows in a fit of pique, but only Duque could sense that each vacuum arrow was only strong on the outside. The previous vacuum arrows maintained the shape of the arrow until they hit the target, then suddenly formed a small whirlpool like a black hole, sucking in the surrounding air to achieve the goal of destroying the node. The current vacuum arrow had already lost its shape halfway through, and began to suck in the surrounding air. The spiritual power that was poured into it was completely incomparable to the first batch of vacuum arrows. Unfortunately, the strength of the giants was never their perception. The Titans had bestowed the giant guardians with surging elemental power and a powerful body that surpassed most creatures in the world, but they no longer had the luxury to bestow them with superior perception and adaptability. Amalron didn't even notice Sylvanas's small movements on the huge gauntlet on Solidar, until he poured another wave of even stronger lightning power into his 10 fingers and poured it out. Queen Sylvanas slowly got into a posture of knocking an arrow. This time, it was not the kind of quick bowstring, and the string that extended out of the bow was no longer blurred starlight. Wind as a bowstring. Lightning as an arrow. It looked like it was stirring up nothingness, but in reality, it was stirring up a level 12 wind. The wind surged violently and finally converged into a thread. It was clearly an invisible stream of wind, but it was countless times tougher than steel wire. As the streamlined muscles on Queen Sylvanas' arms gently swelled, the void actually produced a sound similar to playing a zither. Only then did Amalron realize his mistake. His power was too scattered. It was true that Queen Sylvanas' total amount of wind elemental energy was inferior to his, but at this moment Queen Sylvanas' power was condensed, and the quality of her lightning energy far surpassed his. The bowstring vibrated. The lightning arrow, which was supposed to be loud and powerful, was shot without a sound. That was even more terrifying. A bolt of lightning flashed across the void. Even the Guardian of the Storm Amalron, who had the title of Thunder, had a huge hole in his left palm from this attack. Almost in the blink of an eye, everyone could feel the decline of the Tempest giant's aura. "Congratulations, you've won. Blood Elf Sylvanas Windrunner." Unexpectedly, Amalron, who was clasping his hands, didn't show any signs of fighting to the bitter end. The battle between you and me is over. However, the battle between us guardians and the one who is truly trying to dominate this treasury hasn't ended yet. Amalron's words made Queen Sylvanas feel a little confused. As the winner, you can get what you want. This guardian of the storm was very straightforward, and directly used his uninjured right hand to tap on the Titan rune on his shoulder. Immediately, the Titan rune that seemed to have lost the word big floated down from the sky, and slowly came before Queen Sylvanas. This is the mark of a supreme being in the pantheon. Accept it. It also means that you have accepted the mission of protecting Azeroth. This and the planets will accepting you are two completely different things. If this is what you need, then it is yours. This time the usually decisive Queen Sylvanas hesitated. She pursued power and strength, and didn't mind sacrificing her power for the people she loved, for this beautiful planet. However, the mark of the Titans in the pantheon. If she accepted it and became a servant of the Titans and did things against her will, what would she do? She almost instinctively turned around and looked into the void. She knew that Duque was definitely watching this scene. Her poor knowledge of the universe wasn't enough for her to make a judgment, so she could only ask her lover for help. Duque's voice came right into her ears. Accept it. But when you make the oath, use the name Titan of all living beings of the pantheon. Titans were Titans, why did they have to add the word all living beings? Weren't all living beings just living beings? Wouldn't that mean that any living Titan could order her around? Queen Sylvanas hesitated. Trust me. Duque emphasized. All right. I trust you. Since Duque didn't explain, Queen Sylvanas didn't ask. After spending so many years together, Sylvanas was sure that there was a deeper reason behind what Duque believed in and swore to keep a secret. This unconditional trust made her touch the Titan rune, which was even larger than a table, with both of her hands. A huge amount of knowledge on using the wind element surged into her sea of consciousness like a tidal wave. She didn't notice that the remaining Titan runes on Amalron's body started to dim one by one. In just a few breaths, they were almost devoid of light. At the same time, the rock guardian Archivon suddenly stopped his attacks. What's wrong? Magni asked, panting. Finally, I'm the only one left. Was that sorrow? Was that a sigh? Or was it the sadness of fate? That indescribable feeling caused Magni's fighting spirit to subside. The two giants, one tall and one short, looked at each other. Can you feel it? Magni Bronzebeard, the guardian of the rock and the earth. The earth bears all things, but it can't stop everything that happens on the earth. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter, watching all things prosper and watch all things wither. The cycle repeats itself, but it can't change anything. This feeling, this understanding, do you have it? Archivon said in a low voice. Magni used the flaming devil's hammer to hit the giant tower shield he had formed with the earth element, and it let out a strange buzzing sound that had nothing to do with the earth element. He said in a clear voice, the earth should be watching. But if the earth shatters, all things will cease to exist. Rather than watch helplessly and hopelessly, why not let the burning legion know what the fury of the earth is? After saying that, Magni's eyes turned red. This made Duque's heart skip a beat. This seemed to be even more skewed in fate. No matter how he looked at it, that damn dwarf king had walked on a path of power that was different from history. Chapter 1572. What happened to the earth element specialization? Seeing this scene, Duque felt as if he had fallen from the sky. Yet, Duque, who was the disintegrator of the original works of history, was the one who had turned Azeroth's history upside down. He had no right to say anything. He could only bless Magni in his heart. As long as you're happy. The giant like Magni leaped high into the air. A 6-story tall dwarf performing a jumping slash was quite a shocking sight to behold. That was an unmistakably earth-shattering event. Even with Archivon's thick skin and thick flesh, he didn't dare to receive this attack. He leaped back, moving over 20 meters in a flash. But Magni still didn't let him off, and slammed his hammer onto the floor of the hall. Crack. The ground was collapsing, and a tremor akin to the movement of the Earth's crust spread out. After a short period of shaking, a small volcano appeared in the center of the hall. Scorching lava splattered in all directions, the highest reaching a height of 100 meters. Archivon couldn't dodge in time and was hit. Arga. The dwarf's lava clearly had some special power added. Caught off guard, Archivon was plastered all over his face and he cried out in pain. Magni didn't let him off easily. He swung the house-sized Balrog hammer and smashed it at Archivon with all his might. Bam. With a horizontal sweep, Archivon's helmet was smashed. Bam! With a vertical chop, Archivon's head caved in. If he was a normal human, Archivon would have been as dead as a doornail. But as a special existence that was half life and half elemental, this kind of injury wasn't fatal. Archivon's giant palm, which could send a small fort flying with a single slap, swept Magni, who had a stable footing, over. He couldn't see with his eyes, but he could sense all objects on the ground. He leaped onto Magni's body, riding on Magni's thick bucket-like waist, raised his two large fists and smashed them down on Magni's head. Against such a suppressive attack, the most standard way to retaliate was to use a kick to the opponent's back, and send him flying. Unfortunately, dwarves had short legs. Even though he had become a giant, the proportions of his body remained the same. This meant that Magni was unable to defeat his enemy with this move. Not fighting back wasn't the dwarf's style. Magni did something very shocking. He actually transferred the elements and power of the Balrog magic hammer away, and then used both his hands to block Alcon's arms, returning a hammer blow to Alcon. That's right. It was King headbutt. The blazing Balrog's fire was like a shining red helmet on Magni's head. As the owner of the Flaming Devil Hammer, he did not need to worry about being injured by the flames of the Flaming Devil Hammer. Let's see whose head is harder. Magni shouted with his thick red neck. Archivon really wanted to say, "You're King cheating." Headbutting had always been a way to kill 10,000 enemies while sacrificing 8,000 oneself. It all depended on whose head was harder and whose head was the so-called soft shell. But now Magni's headbutt was pressing down on the other party's skull. Even though Archivon's essence was an earth elemental, having such high purity flames and lava flowing freely on his head was extremely painful. This time he no longer wanted to suppress Magni. He wanted to leave, but it was Magni's turn to hold him tightly and headbutt again and again. Every collision had the feeling of a collapsing mountain. But the characteristics of the Balrog magic hammer allowed Magni to have the upper hand in this exchange. "Come on. This is fun. Let's hurt each other," the Shorty King shouted wildly. This scene made Duque and the other big shots of the Alliance hold their foreheads and sigh. *CK. What happened to the battle that represented the highest level of Azeroth? A guardian with a demigod's body, and a peerless expert who was trying to break through to demigod. The two of them fighting was no different from a street brawl. Are you King kidding me? This time, even Duque turned off the magic mirror. He did not want to watch anymore. The outcome has been decided. Standing in the middle of the passageway in the treasure vault, Duque waited for Sylvanas to arrive. Queen Sylvanas had finally crossed the most difficult boundary between a mortal and a deity. The next step was simple accumulation of power. Congratulations. Duque opened his arms, looking like he was asking for a hug. To be honest, Duque was still a little uneasy up until this moment. A mortal becoming a deity was something to be celebrated, but the sea of divine power and elements entering one's body would also impact one's soul. Duque had read many novels before he transmigrated that humans could easily lose themselves in such situations, becoming more like a deity than a human. When a deity weighed everything on a scale and weighed the gains and losses before acting accordingly, would such a deity or demigod? Just as Duque's thoughts were running wild, Queen Sylvanas had already pounced on him, her fragrant red lips pressing against his. Sylvanas always gave him a sense of independence. He had his own thoughts and his own principles of action. Most of the time, she would give up her private time for her compatriots and to govern the country. She was great, but obviously she would not be a good partner. At this moment, she was like a little wife who had finally found her way home after going through hardships, throwing herself into the arms of her lover. "I'm sorry for making you worry because of my stubbornness." Exhausted, she showed an apologetic smile. "It's good that you're back." Duque stroked Queen Sylvanas' hair. He noticed that her hair color had changed from brilliant pure gold to pale platinum. "Are there any changes or effects? Kiss me again and you'll know." Duque was happy to do it, but in the end, woo woo woo. Duque's tongue was numb. What the hell? Queen Sylvanas' tongue was electrified. Seeing Duque's embarrassment, Queen Sylvanas giggled. Her gorgeous smile made her look like a mischievous little demon on Halloween. "Duque, I can't learn to be gentle and virtuous even in my next life. I am who I am." Queen Sylvanas had thought that Duque would be a little annoyed. Unexpectedly, Duque's smile became even more gentle, and there was a hint of fascination in it. "Yes. You are who you are, the one and only Sylvanas Windrunner of Azeroth." After waiting for a while, Magni's side was also done. Magni, who had returned to his normal form, was that short man who was 5 meters tall again. Although his face was bruised and swollen, he still held his head high and looked very arrogant. It was as if the one who had broken through the mortal boundary wasn't Queen Sylvanas, but him. Magni said in a gruff voice, "Hey, Duque, the 4 guardians have been defeated. What about the treasury? I don't care about their so-called treasures over the years. I don't care who takes the treasures. I at least want to know what the treasures in this treasury are." Chapter 1573. That's right. What was the treasure? The so-called treasures in the original Alcavan's treasure vault were the godly equipment dropped by the Guardians. As long as a player was determined to fight in the arena, they would be excited to see these pieces of equipment. In reality, the items dropped by the 4 Guardians weren't very useful. Duque could say that the treasure vault itself was a trial given by the 4 Guardians to the challengers. This was definitely true. Different people would have different comprehension and encounters. Didn't you see Sylvanas becoming a demigod in one leap? However, there were always greedy and curious factors in human nature. Of course, this had its flaws, but it was precisely these 2 factors that promoted the progress of society and civilization. Following Duque, the big shots of the Alliance were used to getting rich. Insignificant epic-grade equipment could no longer enter their eyes. They pursued a higher level and similarly pursued more things that could prove their glory. Duque smiled mysteriously. "Do you want to know? You can look, but as for what it is, please think about it yourself. I can only say that your efforts today will not be in vain." As soon as he finished speaking, a huge wave of arcane elements surged from Duque's body. It was as if the radiance of the stars in the sky was flickering on his body. Looking closely, one would realize that all the flickering lights were actually mysterious arcane runes. Some of the runes even gave Queen Sylvanas and Magni a strange sense of familiarity. Countless flashing runes flew over, and under Duque's will they turned into rings of light. They formed concentric circles with Duque at the center, and then spread out in all directions of the treasure vault. In just a few seconds, the few who had successfully defeated the Guardians and returned victoriously discovered that the 4 Guardians had actually revived. Onyxia wanted to transform on the spot and beat someone up. Wait. Vashj pulled her back. This time, not only did the Black Dragon Princess notice, but the others also realized that the Guardians walking over from the 4 directions of the treasure vault's passageway were completely silent. These 8-story giants couldn't be as silent as cats when they stepped on the ground. The only explanation was that the 4 of them were perfectly welcoming, or that they didn't exist in the same spatial dimension as Duque. The Rock Warden Alcafen spoke. "Guardian of Azeroth, Duke Marcus. Your strength and wisdom are very great. It is no exaggeration to say that you are the wisest and most powerful existence I have seen in the past 25,000 years. Duque didn't act arrogant. He bowed slightly towards Alcafen to express his respect. How did you find out that we didn't die? Our bodies have indeed completely disappeared from this world." As soon as Duque leaned on a tiche, the 3 crows circled above Duque's head and let out unpleasant caws. It seemed strange, but the appearance of the 3 crows firmly attracted the attention of all the guards. At this time Duque said in a clear voice, "I am a person who does good. I am a person who destroys all evil in Azeroth. My power originates from the endless starry sky and the countless overlapping spaces. My eyes have already transcended time and space." Alcafen sighed. "You are indeed very powerful. But for us, a duty is a duty and there is no room for compromise. We don't have what you want." "No, you do," Duque insisted. "But," Duque raised his empty right palm. "Don't be in a hurry to refuse. The development of the situation has long exceeded your expectations. I just want to negotiate with you once in the name of the Titans of the Pantheon." At this point Alcafen and the other 3 giant guards immediately became serious. Suddenly Alcafen spoke again. He didn't speak any of the languages that were currently popular in the world of Azeroth. That was the Pantheon's language, also known as the Titan language. If Duque couldn't make contact, then he wouldn't even have the qualifications to negotiate with the 4 great guards. Who knew that not only did Duque speak the Titan language, but he also seemed to have done something that made the 4 great guards feel deep veneration. The 4 of them seemed to have quickly reached a consensus. They nodded at each other and then bowed to Duque. The 4 of them, 8 stories tall, bowed at the same time. That aura was rather terrifying. It felt as if 4 tall buildings had collapsed at the same time. If one was standing on a grassland where the sun shone brightly, perhaps it would be as if God had turned off the lights, and the entire sky would instantly turn pitch black. Then the four great guards figures disappeared from the treasury at the same time. Along with them, the originally incomparably dense aura of the four great elements in the treasury disappeared. Seeing this huge palace suddenly turn from the mysterious Titan's treasury into an ordinary historical site, everyone's hearts suddenly became empty. Duque, what did you do just now? Did you subdue these four big fellows? Magni was itching to do so and directly asked Duque. Subdue? Duque seemed to be surprised by this word, and then his expression became even more mysterious. The guards that the Titans created are rather perfect existences. Not only do they have their own will, but they are also very determined. If there are no accidents, they will unswervingly fulfill their guardian duties until they are destroyed. Just think about the dragon's slumber shrine. Everyone immediately understood. If not for the 5 great dragon aspects guarding Azeroth's planet protection array, this beautiful world would have long been turned into ashes by the burning legion's flaming iron hooves. As for the so-called accidents, everyone understood that the best example was Nesario. He had turned from a good dragon aspect to a powerful and crazy villain. Was Duque hinting at something by saying this now? Magni didn't care about this. Hey, where are the treasures in the treasury? You haven't answered my question since the beginning. Duque deliberately kept them in suspense. You will know soon enough. If you are unlucky, perhaps Alcavan will kill his way to the Iron Furnace Castle and destroy your nest. He dares. Magni blew his beard and glared. If I can beat him up once, I can beat him up a second time, a third time, countless times. He. Faced with Magni's questioning and Queen Sylvanie's indirect questioning, Duque refused to say anything. This made the 4 fellows who had just participated in the challenge so angry that their teeth itched. After coming out of the treasury, other than Queen Sylvanie running off to show off, oh no, the whole nation celebrating Queen Sylvanie's entry into the Divine Realm, the expedition to the northern continent had entered a steady state. The Western Front was under Magni's control again, while the Eastern Front was under William's command. The Alliance's 200,000 troops gathered at Utgard Castle and began to besiege King Vriku and his subordinates. Chapter 1574. In the northern region of Northrend, most of the areas were extremely cold. Duque did not know how the Silver Northern Expedition was organized in history. He only knew that even though he had made so many preparations for the conquest of Northrend, there were still all kinds of ridiculous situations. However, there were many soldiers in the Alliance who knew their soldiers well. An old dwarf lectured the new recruits. Let me tell you, the commander of the Alliance, Duke Marcus, is the commander who knows his soldiers the best. If it was in the past, you could only wear broken leather boots. When your toes froze black, your toes would be dead and useless. Now you have imported animal hides from the tribe and cotton boots to protect your feet. Cotton boots, cotton-padded jackets, spiked shoes, snow tracks, military rations and hot soup that could be heated by pulling a wire. Duque even strictly ordered that the toilets must be connected to the barracks. If the soldiers left the barracks to go to the toilet in the middle of the night, even if the toilet was only 5 meters away, they might freeze to death due to the snowstorm. All these details reflected the meticulous preparations that the Alliance had made for this northern expedition. Usually, after sleeping in such a world of ice and snow, even if there were tents, there might be many soldiers who would never wake up the next morning. They did not die on the battlefield but in an unknown place, which was quite a blow to the morale. But since the simple hot beds and the new mobile central heating system were invented, the non-battle losses of soldiers camping in the wild had basically dropped to single digits. William led the Alliance army to attack the Howling Fjord, and in history, less than 10,000 people could kill their way to Utgard Castle. It was not that the Alliance and the Horde did not want to invest more troops, but that the logistics could not keep up. Now it was completely different. The flying fortress Naxxramas opened the way, and the Alliance forcefully landed on the shoals on the east and west sides. Then huge conveyor tracks were set up on the shoals, and the diesel engine drove the tracks to transport boxes of military supplies to the plateau of the Howling Fjord, which was tens of meters high. Soldiers, heavy tanks, and other military equipment were transported back and forth by large elevators. Looking at a group of soldiers using a fire that had been prepared in advance to burn the lower part of the diesel engine, William felt a sense of extravagance. He smiled bitterly. Could it be that Uncle Duque really has the ability to predict the future? Once upon a time, Valera would always play the role of cheering William on and encouraging him, saying that he could surpass Duque. However, after spending so much time together, Valera could no longer say it. Perhaps. The Alliance had only popularized diesel engines in the past few years. Steam engines could not operate in extremely cold weather, but they had been tested. But it was hard to estimate how good a diesel engine would be in a damp place like Nosset. After all, there were not many extremely cold regions in the Eastern Kingdom. Even the snow-covered Loch Moden and the former Alterac only had a temperature of a few degrees below zero. There wasn't a single military consultant or staff officer who suggested how to start a diesel engine that was completely frozen by frost in a temperature of minus 40 degrees Celsius. When the problem arose, most of the Alliance army was in despair. If the Alliance's technological products were excluded, it meant that they could only rely on the most primitive infantry and the Griffin Knights to fight. If that continued, the Alliance would definitely suffer heavy casualties. Who knew that in less than 2 minutes, Duque would reply and ask them to set up a stove under the engine to roast it. It sounded ridiculous, but during World War II on Earth, both the Soviet army and the German army did this in extremely cold weather. Otherwise, even if the soldiers used hammers to smash the ice on the outside, the inside would still be frozen into a lump of ice and would not be able to move at all. If they wanted to roast it, to what extent? He replied, "The ice has melted and the outer armor has started to turn black. Leave the rest to the antifreeze oil." It was a simple, violent, and meaningful solution, and it was settled just like that. However, everyone knew that Duque had never been in the snow for the first half of his life. Something that even the dwarves couldn't do was solved by him. Not only did he use the stove to deal with the frozen machine, but he also used the antifreeze oil. The dwarves had to go through thousands of experiments before they could come up with a better formula. However, Duque had already given them the formula for the results, so he just King did it. Black technology was thrown out one after another, making the gnome and dwarf inventors dizzy. Gerben complained more than once that Duque's actions would make their scientists useless. Duque shrugged. "The Burning Legion will make a comeback in less than 10 years. I can't do anything about it. Why don't you let the Burning Legion be late, and I'll give your scientists more time to practice." Gerben was speechless. With such powerful modern equipment, the armies on both the east and west practically advanced while laying railways. With an irresistible momentum, it only took a little more than a week for them to converge under Utgard Castle. The East Army directly set up heavy cannons across the Imolen waterfall on the east side of the castle, while the main force led by William on the West Army set up the cannons and lined up the Orc Infantry Legion led by young Salyafar. This was not only making the best use of everything but also a form of deterrence. The bombardment of the 155mm heavy cannons only took a few minutes to leave the stronghold of the Vrykul King Imolen riddled with holes. In the eyes of the Alliance's cannons, a castle that had not been reinforced by magical protection arrays was just a large target. The city that the Vrykul had spent a whole 10 centuries to build was destroyed by the cannons of the Alliance in a few minutes. Air Defense Unit, get ready. William raised his 2 swords, Saramani, which was a combination of the Shadow Ripper, Sharatol, and the Shadow Plunderer, Earamin, high up. As expected, the Vrykul, who had half-giant bloodlines and huge bodies, continuously poured out from behind the destroyed high walls of the castle. They spread their legs and swarmed towards the allied forces of the Alliance and the Horde in a messy formation. The Vrykul were loyal to their king Imolen. Although the orcs always said that they were a race born to fight, compared to the Vrykul, it seemed that the Vrykul were more worthy of this title. If they were just the giant Vrykul, it would not be enough for the Alliance to pay so much attention to them. The real name of the Vrykul was the Dragon Raider clan. Among the most commonly seen progenitor dragons, these beasts were different from their relatives of the 5-colored Guardian Dragon clan, who had been bestowed some power and high intelligence by the Titans. The progenitor dragons did not have a magical physique, and their intelligence was slightly lower. Strictly speaking, they were standard dragon beasts. They did not have the long necks of their distant relatives of the Guardian Dragon clan, and their tails were shorter. However, the proportion of their head was larger, and their strong jaws made up more than 40% of their head. The wings were very powerful, but the front legs were almost completely degenerated. When not flying, the wings played the main role of supporting the body. The hind legs were thick and strong and were the main tool for hunting. Compared to the Guardian Dragon clan, their entire body was more streamlined and suitable for flight. Chapter 1575. In any case, the Vrikuans had already trained these terrifying progenitor dragons as mounts. These draconic knights were the biggest problem for the Allied forces. If they didn't get rid of these guys and charged straight to the Ice-Crown Glacier, no one knew what would happen to the Allied forces' supply line. Seeing the swarm of progenitor dragons that looked like a swarm of locusts and dark clouds rising in the sky, almost every Alliance commander revealed a triumphant smile. Let's show these barbarians of the northern region what a trap is. William's ceremony slashed down heavily from the sky. In the sky, Naxxramas didn't even need to open fire. Even the Alliance's airships that were swaying in the air opened all their cannons and fired the 40mm 8-barreled cannons. There were also the new Dongfeng air defense cannons on the ground. In the sky and on the ground, not even 3-style bombs were used. They directly formed a dead zone that could turn the entire airspace into an absolute no-fly zone. It was the black smoke and light projectiles that were pulled out from thousands of air defense cannons at different angles. Amidst the sounds that were denser than the sound of the rain, young Salyafar only saw the sky full of red progenitor dragons being shot into pieces of smelly flesh and blood. Even their masters who were riding them exploded in the air. They didn't even have the chance to fly away from Utgard Castle before they turned into bloody mud and fell back onto the castle. This was the biggest blow to their morale. The Vrikuans' morale was declining at a speed that was almost visible to the naked eye. They were already on the verge of collapse from the bombardment of the heavy cannons before they even engaged in battle. Now, the progenitor dragon legion that they were most proud of had been annihilated. Even the Vrikuan infantry that had already begun to charge had begun to slow down. The earth-shattering shouts from 15 minutes ago were now like the futile cries of 2 or 3 kittens. No one knew if it was to hide the fear in their hearts or if they were truly braver than others. William also felt a little bored. He propped his sword on the ground and only said 4 words, "Sujin, fire." Under the influence of a certain someone, William became a commander of the new era. He had the qualities of a modern military commander on Earth, and he also had powerful combat skills and swordsmanship. He could be said to be the model of a new era leader. Facing the primitive Vrikuans, he didn't hold back. He directly used heavy artillery and mortar formations to blow up the Vrykul who dared to rush out. Any infantrymen who managed to escape the bombardment zone or dragon knights who managed to fly out of the no-fly zone were naturally killed by snipers. William gazed at the dilapidated Utgard castle with a faint smile on his face. Uncle Duque really takes care of Stormwind. Yeah. Brawl Baremantle of the Iron Triangle also sighed. As the commander-in-chief, Duque's forte was this kind of seeming fairness, but there was no trace of favoritism. Putting the dwarves on the western front meant that the dwarves couldn't be the main force on the eastern front. The small Vrykul raider clan was definitely not worthy of William's full strength. What Duque and William really valued were the eggs of the ancestor dragons. Adult dragons had their own will. They were used to being commanded by the Vrykul, so it was impossible for them to listen to humans. Dragon eggs were different. The ancestor dragons were typical wild beasts. They wouldn't be like the chromatic dragons, even if they already had their own senses and consciousness in the dragon eggs. As long as they could seize the dragon eggs, Stormwind would be able to nurture an army of its own dragon knights in time. It wasn't that the current griffins weren't useful. Although griffins were easier to tame, their combat power was still inferior to that of the dragon race. This had been proven through countless battles. Secondly, the Wildhammer dwarves were the best at taming griffins in the Alliance. It could be said that the Wildhammer dwarves had the best griffin population in their hands. If Stormwind wanted to further develop its own air force, it would be necessary to have an exclusive aerial race. The Night Elves had hippogriffs, the Blood Elves had draconic hawks, the dwarves and pygmies had griffins, and the humans had ancestor dragons. Anyway, as long as they didn't directly control a large number of chromatic dragons, the Dragon Sleep Shrine wouldn't have any objections. It's a pity that the Kiraji insect people aren't used to cold areas. William muttered to himself. William, don't be greedy. Besides, those insects aren't directly under Stormwind. Valilla's words made William laugh. The following battle could be said to be daunting but not dangerous. When the Vrykul's forces that could be used for a counterattack had been wiped out, it was time for the most orthodox siege battle. After smashing all the arrow towers and other things on the periphery, heavy cannons were never able to blast the towering fortress into the ground in the truest sense of the word. When a large amount of rubble was laid on top of the ruins, the cannons would also become ineffective. Cannons also cost money. In order to contribute to the remnants of the castle buried under the rubble, they had no choice but to send in the infantry. Young Salyafar's Blackrock Orc army came in handy at this time. With a continuous chant of Loktar Ogre, the Vrykul were overturned. The Vrykul were slightly taller than the strongest orc, about 3 meters tall. Their strength was comparable to the orcs, but their agility was a notch lower. Their movements were sluggish and clumsy. What determined victory or defeat was the weapon. The Alliance's mass-produced fine steel weapons and multi-layer composite plate armor gave the orcs greater destructive power and better survivability. In fact, the concept of composite plate armor was also proposed by Duque. Considering the decreasing lethality of sharp weapons in close combat, as well as the larger enemies they would face in the future. With the physique of a human, being smashed by a 2.5-meter-tall orc with all its might was the same as being smashed by a 3-meter-tall giant with one blow. Therefore, Duque proposed the concept of composite plate armor. Its principle was similar to the reactive armor of the American main battle tank M1A1 in the last century. Its interlayer material provided better penetration resistance. Of course, a single soldier wouldn't be able to use something as high-end as reactive armor. What Duque developed was to change the original one layer of stamped plate armor into 2 layers of the same thickness. It was just that a large number of fixed small springs were installed in the 2 layers of plate armor, and then filled with a large amount of cotton to balance defense and warmth. This was because iron could make the human body lose heat faster. After repeated tests, the composite plate armor could greatly increase the survival rate of soldiers by more than 50% against attacks from heavy weapons such as hammers and sticks. The frontline soldiers all said it was good after using it. Of course, on the surface, Duque wouldn't favor one over the other. Even young Salufar's troops who came to work were equipped with the composite plate armor of the orcs. He said that after this battle, the orcs could take the plate armor with them when they returned. Duque's generosity deeply moved a simple and valiant general like young Salufar. Unfortunately, Duque wasn't a green-faced, fanged orc. Otherwise, young Salufar might have knelt down and willingly become his lackey. Chapter 1576. The gap in strength between the Alliance and the Horde had widened to such an extent that there was no need for any tricks. The primitive industrial strength of the Horde meant that even if Salufar took away the composite plate armor, he would not be able to replicate it. To make the plate armor from thick to thin without losing its original strength and toughness, this itself required better steel casting technology. That was a technology that even the goblins could not master, let alone the Horde. Even if the Rustwater conglomerate mastered this technology, it was another matter whether they would be willing to work for the Horde and create composite plate armor to meet the needs of millions of infantry. Even if the Horde could mass-produce it, it was time for the new generation of alloy armor to appear. Duque was full of stuff. If he wanted to get rid of the Horde, he could definitely make it so that the taillights of the Horde's car could not be seen. In the Battle of Utgard, Prince Karaseth of the Vrykul was killed by Salufar Jr. Ingvar, the plunderer guarding the center of the castle, was killed by Gavinrad. Gadak Ashentai, the living statue of the ice mammoth who was resurrected by necromancy, was killed by Tyrion Fordring. A long time ago, because the Vrykul protected the ancestors of the humans, they were hunted by the cruel Skadi. The Vrykul would name a person after a characteristic. Since it was cruel, one could imagine what kind of person this guy was. It was this long-lived Skadi who was personally beaten by Eiril the Hoof. As for the king of the Vrykul, Imolan, he was naturally left to Varian. Everything seemed to be going well. If there were no problems, the Alliance was likely to follow the plan and fight all the way north, taking care of Grizzly Hills and Zudak. But there were 9 out of 10 things in the world that did not go one's way. Duque had planned so much and prepared so well, but he still encountered a lot of F***king things. A seemingly insignificant event, and an out-and-out major event, happened almost at the same time. Khadgar sent a message. The Titan Guardian of Azeroth, Loken, the King of Wisdom, has sent an important message. He hopes that Master can personally go over. Alexstrasza suddenly sent a message in exasperation. That idiot Maligos has attacked the Ice Crown Glacier. Duque was so angry that he said F***ck at the highest level of Karazhan more than 10 times in a row. The people around Duque rarely saw Duque lose his composure like this. In their eyes, Duque was always so confident, as if he was the god of fate who controlled fate. Vashj, who was starting to get familiar with Duque, was also a little surprised. Fortunately, everyone knew that Duque was not the kind of person who would get angry for no reason. At this time, Duque's 3 maids did not dare to go up and persuade him. Unknowingly, everyone's gazes turned to Aurelia, Duque's first and most intimate partner. Duque, what happened? Aurelia walked over slowly. Although her stomach was slightly bulging, she still looked elegant and charming. Duque raised his head on the chair and held his forehead with his hand. There was a clear sense of frustration in his voice. No, I'm just a little disappointed. There were some things that I knew would happen and I did my very best to avoid them, but I still couldn't stop them from seeking death. This makes me feel a sense of powerlessness. Aurelia walked behind Duque and stretched out a pair of white jade-like arms from the back of the chair to gently massage Duque's temples. Don't blame yourself too much. You're a mere demigod, not a guardian appointed by the Titans, and definitely not the Titans themselves. I think even the Titans of creation, who are known to be omniscient and omnipotent, have things they can't do. Thinking of the bitter end of the pantheon, Duque could not help but smile bitterly. That's true, I'm too focused on perfection. At this time Aurelia gave the three maids a look. The maids immediately understood. Vashti naturally came up to massage Duque's legs. Solarian and Vanessa's reactions were a little funny. All along Duque did not treat them as maids but more like adjutants. What they did was basically fight and kill in Duke's name and watch over the place. So when they came up the situation was quite funny. The two of them were very stiff with their massage techniques. After a few massages, Duque raised his hand and said, all right. I'm not that delicate. If you want to enjoy yourself, wait until you kill the Burning Legion. You can leave. Aurelia can stay. Aurelia nodded and the three maids quickly left. Duque gently pressed his ear against Aurelia's lower abdomen. Here, I'm stressed because I know better than anyone the terrifying situation I'll face in the future. I've been working so hard to preserve Azeroth's vitality as much as possible. But this time I've realized that since some people can't be controlled, they'll definitely court death. So be it. I'll build a truly united and invincible army that can fight against the Burning Legion. Aurelia kissed Duque's forehead with infinite gentleness on her face. It's okay, we all know you're the best. You're the great hero of this world. Think about it, if you weren't so great, such an outstanding Windrunner, how could the three Windrunner sisters give themselves to you and be willing to have children with you? Thank you. Whether Duque was angry or hesitant, all negative emotions were temporary. After he sorted out his thoughts, he once again summoned the leader of the Alliance and Alexstrasza for a magic video conference. Everyone, I have bad news to tell you. Just 15 minutes ago, the Dragon Aspect, King of Magic Malygos, killed his way into the Ice Crown Glacier in the name of revenge for his partner, Syndagosa. At the same time, the ancient guardian, Loken, the King of Wisdom, sent a message to discuss the Creator's sanctuary. At this point, Duque pressed hard on the table in front of him, and his whole body leaned forward, revealing a strong aura. What I want to say is that we're facing two major crises at the same time. The first is the possible betrayal of the King of Magic. The second is the conspiracy of the King of Wisdom, Loken. What? Wait. The red dragon in the video was anxious. Malygos isn't going to betray us. First of all, he might not lose. Even if he loses, he won't lose his life and become a bone dragon, right? Moreover, he's very good at escaping. Magni was also a little anxious. What's going on with that Loken? The conspiracy of the ancient guardian? Duque first looked at Alexstrasza. The beautiful red dragon had a clear look of anxiety on her face. He could imagine that Nesario's betrayal back then had already broken her heart. As the big sister of the five-colored dragon aspect, she would always charge at the front in every battle in order to block more firepower for her brothers and sisters. In the past, Duque had tolerated it in order to maintain a friendly relationship with the Dragon Slumber Shrine. When he couldn't bear it anymore, there was no need to bear it anymore. Chapter 1577. He had had enough of Malygos' stupidity, and he had had enough of playing the heartbeat game with this lunatic every now and then. Duque finally flipped the table of his mind in anger. With a sullen face, he spoke with the most solemn expression and tone. I've never been stingy with imagining the worst-case scenario with the greatest malice. Then, there are two things in front of us. Loken's problem has been confirmed. Although he hid it well, I smell a terrible smell on him, the smell of the ancient god Yogg-Saron. At the mention of Yogg-Saron, no matter who it was, their faces did not look good. None of the ancient gods were useless. They did not expect another ancient god to appear just after they killed Si-Thun. Everyone immediately thought of the problem of the planet's will. 25,000 years ago, because they found that the ancient gods and astral souls were too deeply entangled. Eliminating a few ancient gods at once would only kill astral souls. That was why the Titans of the Pantheon let them go and sealed them instead. 25,000 years had passed, and Azeroth astral souls had gradually grown and begun to have their own will. That was why Duque communicated with the planet's will in on Karaj and joined forces with the Sleeping Dragon Temple and Elun to completely kill Si-Thun. Astral soul's current condition? Kalia asked. Duque shook his head. Last time was equivalent to humans cutting off their own flesh to heal. Although the abscesses were removed, the wounds would eventually heal, but not so quickly. Astral souls only survive the most dangerous period. Let's talk about Yogg-Saron first, the Red Dragon Queen said. Of course, Duque knew what she was thinking. If Yogg-Saron's situation was more serious, as a dragon aspect, she had a reason to deal with the ancient gods first, and then deal with Malygos. Duque did not refuse. He told her the history he knew. Loken was the ancient god watcher created by the Titans in Azeroth, the external guardian of Oder. Other than the Pentashade dragons, there were also 8 Titan guardians who were of the same status as the Titans. Loken was one of the Titan guardians. He represented wisdom. There were also Storm, Winter, Life, Order, and Invention, the 5 Titan guardians, Odin, Great Guardian Laden, and a Creator's Engine Guardian. Located in the northern part of No Scent, east of the Ice Crown Glacier, Oder was the largest of the 3 laboratories built by Titan on Azeroth. The goal was to develop a perfect creature, and the evolution of a creature required time. Since the Titans wouldn't stay on the same planet for too long, they would visit and observe from time to confirm their progress. There were also many assistants and servants to help manage the laboratory. These were all created by Titan himself. When the Titans visited for the second time, they discovered that the laboratory had been invaded by the ancient gods and that the entire planet was under their rule. After fighting with these stubborn enemies, they discovered that because they had deeply infected the laboratory, they couldn't be completely wiped out. As such, they decided to seal them away in the depths of Azeroth. The one who infected Oder the most was Yogg-Saron, and he was also sealed here. The entire laboratory was sealed. The name Yogg-Saron was first mentioned in the Grizzly Hills, where there was a withered world tree, Vaudrasil. If one had a good relationship with the bear monsters, they would tell adventurers that in ancient times, the Night Elven Druids planted this world tree, but because the roots were too deep, they even reached the lair of the ancient god Yogg-Saron. The dark power of the ancient god began to leak, and the Night Elven Druids were afraid that Vaudrasil would cause a huge disaster, so they destroyed the world tree. Later, some of the nearby bear monsters began to replant Vaudrasil, which had been broken into 3 pieces, and planned to resurrect Ushik, the great bear god who had died in the ancient war. In the end, Ushik was resurrected by the bear monsters, but he was already contaminated by the ancient god. With the help of adventurers, some of the bear monsters finally used the purified dust of Vaudrasil to purify Ushik. After introducing this terrible history of contamination, Duque concluded, "Now everyone has an idea of Yogg-Saron's ability to contaminate, right? Loken is not the head of the Titan Guardians set up by the Pantheon in Azeroth. I received news that Odin, the manager of Oder, has gone into self-exile. The other Guardians are not in normal condition, and I found the scent of Yogg-Saron in the video communication sent by the other party." At this point, Duque pressed his hands heavily on the table. "I can be absolutely sure that Loken, the King of Wisdom, has fallen into madness. He has been corrupted by the ancient god, and secretly plotted to murder the other Guardians and tampered with Oder's files." This. Everyone gasped. Everyone was used to the whispers and corruption of the ancient god. Previously there had been a good dragon aspect, Nesario, who had been corrupted. Now that there was a Guardian rebellion, it was not unacceptable. Duque had peeked at Sargera's past achievements from Mediv, so no one doubted his words. For a moment, everyone felt immense pressure. A Lich King was troublesome enough, and an ancient god had appeared at the same time. It would be a huge problem if they left it alone. Now there was also the Blue Dragon King involved. Just as Alexstrasza was about to say something, Duque slammed the table. "Alexstrasza, you don't have to persuade me. The matter of Malygos was related to my foundation in the Divine Domain. If I attacked Oder or Icecrown Fortress with all my strength, only to have Malygos break through my magic net in the end, that would truly be the end of me. Before the matter of Malygos is resolved, I will not step into Oder or Icecrown Glacier." As the saying went, people of the same trade were enemies. Even if Malygos, the self-proclaimed king of magic in the world of Azeroth, and Duque, who controlled the weave, claimed to be in different fields, at the end of the day, it involved the distribution of core interests. Who got more elemental energy from the major elemental realms and who got less. If one had more, the other would naturally have less. In the past, they were comrades in the same trench, and the cake was big enough that they could barely coexist peacefully. Now that no one was optimistic that Malygos would succeed in finding trouble with Arthas, there would be many variables. It was not that the Red Dragon Queen could not understand Duque's approach. She was caught in the middle and she was not a dragon either. On one side was her brother, and on the other was her most important ally. and the power of mortals could be said to be getting stronger. It was impossible for the dragon aspect to increase its power. However, the upper limit of mortals was only at the level of astral souls. With Duque, Sylvanus, Vashch, and the Karaji twin emperors, the power and opinions of mortals could no longer be ignored. Chapter 1578. Let's wait and see. What else could Alexstrasza do? That was all she could say. The meeting ended on a sour note. Everyone knew that there would be a result soon. Malygos, the king of magic, was never the kind of dragon that could last for long. His magic was more like a wave. When there was a huge disparity in strength, he could instantly kill his opponent. When the disparity was not big, he could hurt his opponent. He might even be able to use his dragon body to resist the enemy's counterattack and kill him. If he could not hurt his opponent, he would not be surprised. He would lose if he lost. The arrogant Malygos rushed into Arthas' lair, the ice-crowned fortress. Arthas even opened the magic defense array above the ice-crowned fortress for him so that the Blue Dragon King could directly come to the ice throne. Ordinary Calamity grades had no chance of winning against the king of magic of the dragon race. Since resistance was meaningless, it was better to fight it out directly. Sitting on the ice throne, Arthas could only see two glints of blue light from the Lich King's helmet. He silently watched the icy blue behemoth slowly descend from the sky. It pounced on the shining blue wings that did not belong in this gray sky. Every time it flapped its wings, the cold air swept across the entire ice-crowned fortress like an ice storm. The temperature, which was already cold enough, dropped even further. The absolute zero turbulence easily covered the entire area above the ice-crowned fortress with thick snow except for the ice throne. Roar! A dragon roar sounded. In the few layers near the ice throne, every undead was shocked by this primordial roar that seemed to come from the distant past. This roar came from the overlord of the planet that had been at the top of the food chain for 25,000 years. The dragon race. This dragon roar belonged to a king of magic who controlled the elements. The terrifying pressure of the two domains directly made the slightly weaker elite undead warriors feel unstable. It was as if the soul fire nestled in their decaying chest could be extinguished at any time. Descending from the clouds, Malygos did not directly land on the square at the top of the ice-crowned fortress. He flapped his dark blue wings and hovered above the ice throne. His golden eyes were like a pair of golden balls made of gold, and he looked at Arthas, who was sitting upright on the throne of ice with a kind of coldness that belonged to the ruler of the elemental world. The guy who called himself the Lich King had no intention of standing up. He still sat on the throne, which made Malygos very unhappy. However, he liked the feeling of looking down on his enemy. Despicable blasphemer Arthas. You should know why I'm here. Malygos let out a rumbling sound, and under his huge blue jaw, his white beard fluttered in the surging cold wind. Syndagosa? Arthas's voice was filled with obvious disdain. I was just worrying about the lack of air forces, and here you are. Although I don't believe in luck, it does seem to exist. Malygos' face became very interesting. Perhaps in this master dragon's imagination, even if Arthas didn't kowtow as if he had seen a god, he should be trembling. He really couldn't see any possibility of Arthas defeating him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have charged into Ice-Crowned Fortress alone to find trouble with Arthas. Of course, he had absolute confidence in his own strength. At the same time, he was also here to take advantage of the situation. Winter's Embrace Lake wasn't far from his lair. With Duque as bait, the combined attack of Alexstrasza and Elun was completely within his range of perception. He was absolutely aware of how serious Arthas' injuries were. Who knew that he would be treated as an idiot who was delivering food to the other party? How could the proud Malygos not be angry? Presumptuous. Accompanied by a terrifying dragon's roar, the cold wind under Malygos' dark blue wings was like clouds of ice, with specks of blue cold light in the clouds. After these scattered lights descended, the frost elements above the entire ice-crowned fortress became chaotic. The frost elements that were supposed to bow to the Lich King all worshipped and offered their loyalty to the primordial king of magic in the world of Azeroth. It felt terrible to be deprived of control of the subordinate elements. In the elemental world, Arthas's hearing should have been the sound of countless strings breaking. In practically a single exchange, the elements that Arthas could control were reduced to a pitiful area of less than 10 meters around the ice throne. The huge ice-crowned fortress had almost become Malygos' territory. His blue eyes still emitted a dim light. This time, Arthas finally stood up. Facing the smug Blue Dragon King, Arthas smiled. Perhaps it should be attributed to some kind of inorganic sound similar to laughter. It sounded hollow and strange. Malygos, you are indeed very strong. Ever since Duke Marcus set despicable traps for me again and mobilized a large number of strong people to surround me, I also feel that the quality of my subordinates is a bit lacking. You came just in time. Huh? Have you gone mad? Malygos raised his chin high, looking like he wanted to see what else he could do. Arthes held the hilt of Frostmourne with both hands and raised his head slightly. Now I just find it funny. Has my nickname changed from Lich King to King of Ice? Malygos's arrogant smile suddenly froze. If the other party was a pharaoh or someone who relied on the elements for a living, when all the other party's elements were controlled by him, the ancestor of magic, the result would be a beating. Malygos calmed down. Liches play with corpses. I'm not afraid even if Sindagosa comes out alive. There are no corpses of top experts for him to enslave. Before the Blue Dragon King's imagination could end, Arthes had already solved the mystery himself. Hee hee. Arthes let out a sound that should have been a sneer. Why would someone as great as me allow the vulgar you to come before my throne? It's to let you personally taste the 10,000 years of regret that you forged with your own hands. The Frostmourne, in his hand, suddenly became as large as the sky. Although it was just a shadow, some things that were bound in the shadow of the huge rune sword almost made Malygos collapse on the spot. No. Don't come over. Like a frightened girl, Malygos screamed and turned around to fly. However, the blue dragon shadows behind him were faster than him. Father, your majesty, great majesty, darling. Chapter 1579. No, don't come over. Malygos flapped his wings with difficulty and continued to flee with all his might. However, no matter how fast he was, he could not overcome the resistance of the air and storm, let alone fly faster than the souls of his compatriots. In the blink of an eye he was caught up. That's right, the ones pestering him were the blue dragons who had betrayed him in the ancient war. Despite knowing that his entire race was in a weakened state, he still mobilized his army in a fit of rage, which ultimately led to the death of all the blue dragons. His most loyal guards, his most beloved children, and his most beloved blue dragon queen Sindagosa. It was that battle that almost wiped out the entire blue dragon race. If Krasis hadn't secretly helped Malygos hide a few blue dragon eggs during the ancient war, the blue dragon race would have been even worse off. However, this fiasco had obviously become a nightmare for Malygos that he could not get rid of for 10,000 years. He had also given up treatment because of this extremely tragic blow, and hid in a small black hole for 10,000 years. It was not until Duque helped him kill Nethario that his mental state improved a little. Who knew? The nightmare would come again. These dragons had all died on the battlefield in the ancient war, and even their remains had not been transported back to the Dragonbone Wilderness for burial. They were victims who had died outside. Unable to return to their roots, and unable to rest in peace after countless days and nights of anticipation for 10,000 years, these dragon souls had long become extremely twisted and crazy. If Malygos was still a normal dragon king with his own characteristics as a dragon aspect and strong willpower, not to mention dealing with a group of dragon souls, he might not even be able to take Kill Jaden's Darkness of 1,000 Souls head-on. However, what Arthes had directly released was an ultimate move that Malygos could not resist at all. If he really dared to face Sindagosa, he would have done it when Duque had reminded him to collect his wife's remains. It was precisely because of the death of his wife and children that his willpower was greatly weakened, and he became a psychopath. What was trapped by Frostmourne was, of course, the real souls of his wife and children. In the past he did not dare to face them. Every night when he was asleep he would wake up because of them. Now that he was facing the souls, Malygos broke down on the spot, and wanted to run away while crying. What arrogance! What glory! What dignity! All of it. Trying to run? Is this Princess Throne something you can come and go as you please? Arthes let out a cold laugh. He took a step forward, and a stairway made of ice suddenly rose up at high speed. In the next instant, Arthes shot out like a cannonball, like a compressed spring. In the face of a peerless expert, this kind of attack that seemed to be a one-way trip was simply like sending food to his death. Against a dragon king who had lost his confidence and was on the verge of a mental breakdown, this was the only way for Arthes to achieve a quick victory. Vengeful spirits and disturbances could only confuse a true expert for a short moment. No matter how much Arthes saw Malygos, he had already suffered at the hands of Duque time and time again. He could only treat Malygos as his strongest enemy. He's a dragon king after all, right? As it turned out, Arthas had overestimated Malygos. He had simulated it countless times in his imagination. For example, Malygos would suddenly wake up in the chaos and use his dragon tail or other more powerful skills to counterattack. In the end, he didn't even need to use it. Frostmourne plunged deeply into the Blue Dragon King's chest without any suspense. Based on the feeling and the soul feedback from the runic magic sword, Arthas knew that this sword had succeeded. If the remnant souls of Sindagosa and Malygos' children had only troubled this Blue Dragon King on a purely spiritual level, now it had penetrated deep into the concept of the soul. The huge skull on Frostmourne seemed to be smiling sinisterly. Along the huge and cold evil blade, the true soul cores of Sindagosa and Malygos' children were forcibly injected into the Blue Dragon King's body, entangling with their king's soul. Hee. Arthas laughed coldly. She pulled out her sword and descended, allowing the Blue Dragon King, who was howling in fear after being injured, to flap its wings and fly away. So, this is how it feels to be in control of the fate of a top-notch expert. This feels so good. Under the thick full helmet, the ghostly blue eyes flickered non-stop. Arthas's entire body began to fall. He had only fallen into the air when the cold wind rising from the ice throne had already caught him and slowly allowed him to descend back onto the throne. Seeing the huge blue dragon flapping its wings and flying far away, Blood Queen Lanais hurriedly approached the throne. Supreme Lich King. Arthas waved his hand. No, let him go. We'll go inside the gate of divine wrath. In less than half a day, the news that the Blue Dragon King had been severely injured by the Lich King and had to flee with serious injuries spread throughout the entire allied army. Most of the Alliance and Horde leaders were shocked. After all the previous reports said that Arthas had been tricked by Duque and had been beaten until he spat out ketchup or something. Who knew that he would cripple Malygos, one of the planet's top forces, and could only flee with his tail between his legs. Arthas' strength is on a completely different level when he's outside the Ice-Crown Glacier than when he's inside. Everyone thought in this direction. Although Alexstrasza was worried about Malygos' serious injuries, she was even more relieved that Malygos did not die in the Ice-Crown Citadel and become a bone dragon under Arthas' command, just as Duke had said. Malygos She even tried to communicate with her brother using magic. In the image, Malygos was in a very bad state. His dragon face was clearly lacking color. Seriously injured but still alive, this was the conclusion the Red Dragon Queen came to. Malygos only replied with one word, humph. Then he turned off the communication. She was not surprised. Malygos was like this, arrogant and unaccepting. She completely understood that he must be very upset after suffering such a sudden defeat. He did not want his sisters to see him embarrassed. He was already giving them face by answering her message. In her perception, Malygos did not look back and flew directly to the west of Northrend. That was where his lair towering in the sky on the island was located, the magic pivot. Alexstrasza turned to give Duque a warning. Malygos is not in a good state, but he is still a member of the Sleeping Dragon Temple. I will pretend that I did not hear what you said before. Did you communicate with him using magic? Can you send me the image of the communication? Duque asked instead. The Red Dragon Queen put her hands on her hips and frowned. She was obviously a little unhappy. I saw it with my own eyes. He was defeated, injured, and humiliated. To a dragon king, a dragon aspect, the dragon aspect. There is nothing worse than this. If you want to rub salt in the wound, then I am sorry, but this will make me hate you. What else could Duque say? He could only remain silent. Chapter 1580. They were brothers and sisters, but their bones were still connected. If Duque said too much, it would seem like he was trying to sow discord between them. Originally, Duque had a lot to say to Alexstrasza, but when the words came to his mouth, he couldn't say a word. It was just that his vigilance towards Malygos was at its peak. As he cut off the magic communication with the Red Dragon Queen, Duque sent a level 1 alert in the Alliance. Magni, it's still about Malygos. Suspend the war on the Western Front. All mobile troops retreat to the nearest large town, preferably a fortress. Move Naxxramas back to the holy city of Inkyra to cover the vanguard of the Western Front. We have to get our troops back as soon as possible. That big blue lizard, Speaking of which, aren't we afraid of provoking Alexstrasza by doing this? Magni also had a headache. Duque said firmly, I'm the commander of the Alliance. She can be emotional, but I can't. I have to be responsible for the lives of millions of soldiers. Should we inform the tribe? I'll tell Thrall now. As for what the tribe does, we don't care. Seeing Duque's expression, Magni already knew what was going on. Duque had already calculated everything. It was rare for the Warsong clan to return to a land rich in prey. It was a feast after 25 years of hardship. While the Alliance was busy conquering Northrend, the Warsong clan's vanguard stationed in the North Wind Tundra was more like occupying territory. Mining, hunting, slaughterhouses. Almost all the traditional tribal industries could be found near this newly built Warsong stronghold. Would they be willing to suddenly evacuate? Duque used magic communication to find Thrall. Thrall was very concerned about Duque's serious warning. What? Azeroth's aspect, the Blue Dragon King Malygos, was seriously injured by Arthas. He might go insane and rebel? Thrall was shocked. The tribe didn't get on the Dragon Slumber Temple's good side because the old tribe had enslaved the Red Dragon Queen. The tribe didn't expect to get any help from the dragons. In any case, he was an ally of an ally, so he was still his ally. Now that their relationship was passable, it was fine. Who knew that the Dragon Slumber Shrine would actually produce this brainless king? Since he couldn't beat Arthas, he might even turn around and cause trouble? Sal was stunned. There was no way Thrall would let the Draenor immigrants who had just arrived in Kalimdor go on an expedition without a firm foothold. The ones going to Northrend this time were Blackstone and Warsong of the Beastman's Cornerstone clans. Sar only left his Frostwolf clan in Kalimdor. It was precisely because Sal believed that Duque would not harm his compatriots that he sent these two clans who could fight. All along he had been following Duque, so there was still some meat, but how much was another matter. The tribe did not contribute much, so Sal was too embarrassed to ask Duque for things. Duque was also famous for his kindness. Now that Duque said that Malygos was a trap, Thrall accepted this reality without hesitation. I will immediately inform the troops in the Northwind Taiga to evacuate. Having been with the Alliance for a long time, Thrall also realized the importance of instant communication. The tribe was not as rich as the Alliance, which normalized magic communication and assigned communication tools to squadrons. But the Warsong stronghold was still notified. Who knew that the news that came back from the Warsong clan would make Sal's heart go cold? What? Gurus arrived at the Warsong stronghold 3 days ago and pulled the main force out to hunt? Letting Gurus go was purely for the purpose of training. Sal had thought that there was no war on the Western Front, so it would be good to let Gurus go to the northern region to see the world. Who knew that this would happen soon after he was sent? Sal's face turned white. Just as Sal wanted to deal with this matter further, the magic pivot had already changed. It happened more than half a day ago. Malygos rarely contacted Alexstrasza. I have something for you. I can't leave. Arthas has moved. He's behind the Heaven's Wrath Gate. I can feel his presence. Then you can send an ancient dragon to get it? That Kristasa I met before is not bad. Let her come? Although the Red Dragon Queen had doubts, out of trust in her brother, she did not think much and directly sent the female ancient red dragon over. No one had expected that Kristasa would be attacked as soon as she entered Malygos' lair in the magic pivot. Malygos caught her off guard and bit the back of her neck. Then, his body, which was larger and more powerful than hers, pressed down on her with the weight of Mount Tai. Oh, King of the Blue Dragons, what are you doing? No, I was only ordered to get something. The poor female red dragon screamed, but she had no room to struggle. A sneak attack, coupled with the huge difference in strength, she was easily subdued. Kristasa's screams and screams spread throughout the magic pivot. None of the blue dragons knew whether or not Malygos wanted to turn them into his consort. Only Malygos himself knew the answer. No matter what his intentions were, the blue dragons could hear her painful cries and the uneasy whispers she made as she gradually lost her mind. No one dared to question their king. Furthermore, male blue dragons were famous for their taste. That, even if Alexstrasza knew, she would only feel wronged for this poor female red dragon. The next day, Malygos, who seemed to be less nervous, walked out of his nest in high spirits. Although all the blue dragons noticed a black spot on their king's chest, no one made a sound. Malygos raised his head high and made a declaration that shocked the world. My battle with Arthas failed. There is only one reason for my failure. My power has been severely weakened. When the Titans of the Pantheon left Azeroth, they personally gave me the responsibility of guarding magic. However, shameless mortals have stolen my authority. Not only did they despicably develop their own way to use magic, they also bypassed my supervision. Without my permission as the king of magic, they contacted the Star Souls and named themselves as demigods. Yes. This despicable, shameless human, his name is Duke Marcus. Now, in the name of the dragon aspects and the king of magic, I order all intelligent races that can use magic, except the dragons, to immediately cut off all magic circuits and destroy all books and records about magic. And the self-proclaimed demigod of the weave, Duke Marcus, immediately rushed over to kill himself in front of me and cut off his position as a god, returning to the cycle of life. Foolish mortals! I only give you 72 hours to complete all of this. Otherwise, you will face the endless anger of me and my blue dragon army. Chapter 1581. Only 72 hours. And Duque had to commit suicide? This time, even without Duque's reminder, even if Alexstrasza was slow and blinded by kinship, she came to her senses. Isra, something has happened to Malygos. He refused my summons and detained Christasa. Isra hurriedly tried to contact Malygos through dreams, but she was immediately shocked. Sister. Malygos' state is very similar to Nisario's. Madness, paranoia, chaos. He was now in a state of déjà vu which made their hearts sink. Duque is right again? The Red Dragon Queen's voice made people feel as if she was dreaming. Sister, we have to make a decision, Isra whispered. Decision? Easier said than done. Ever since they were created by the Titans, they had gone through so many storms together. The special emotional bond between the chromatic dragon aspects could no longer be described in words. Nisario eventually fell into madness and betrayal because of the whispers of the ancient gods, which was enough to make Alexstrasza's heart ache. She did not expect that after 10,000 years, she would have to face the same heartache again. As a dragon aspect, it was not that she had never thought that she might fall, but it was not at the hands of the powerful Burning Legion demons, but at the claws of her brothers and sisters again. This heartache left her at a loss. In the end, Alexstrasza only said 2 words to Duque, sorry. Duque understood completely. It's not your fault. The Red Dragon Queen only replied to Duque with a sad smile and cut off the communication. Then the Alliance, Horde and Sleeping Dragon Temple issued a joint statement. The Azeroth dragon aspect, Malygos, the king of magic, was plotted against in a duel with the Lich King. Not only was he insane but he was also fatally injured. After his death he will become a bone dragon. A stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. This not only cast a thick haze over the unstoppable northern expedition, but also indicated that Arthas's strength had been greatly enhanced. The aftermath of its negative effects was still further fermenting. Inside the Gate of Heaven's Wrath, Arthas let out a cold laugh. As expected of my nemesis, Duke Marcus? He immediately guessed my little trick. But so what? Malygos is already my possession. Duque's guess was right. On the surface, Malygos was still alive and kicking, but in fact, his heart had been completely cut off by Frostmourne. However, Arthas still kept his heart beating, making Malygos look like he was still alive. If Duque hadn't discovered it, then according to the original plan, Malygos would still use this as an excuse to fight Duque over the weave. It might even drag the Dragon Sleep Shrine, who did not know the truth, into the whirlpool of internal strife. It's just that the way it is now is pretty good. A real Dragon King as a mount. Ah. The Lich King's maniacal laughter reverberated throughout the tunnels. In fact, from the moment Malygos barged into Icecrown Fortress like an idiot, everything was destined to be a tragedy. The only difference was how great the loss would be. The Blue Dragon Legion also had intense disagreements. Most of the Blue Dragons were at a loss. On one side was the strict order of their king, and on the other side was the appeal of the 4 dragon aspects, Alexstrasza, Isra, Nozdormu and Onyxia. This was different from history. In history, Malygos was indeed an idiot when it came to this matter, but this was more like a battle for justice. That was why most of the Blue Dragons listened to Malygos' orders and even attacked the Dragon Sleep Temple. This time, there was clearly a conspiracy. After all, even the Blue Dragon Legion had heard that the former Lich King, Nizul, had caused Arthas to fall. Therefore, when Kalegos, who guarded the Sunwell, unexpectedly publicly announced his opposition to Malygos' orders, the Blue Dragon Legion split. In the Blue Dragon Legion, there were only a little more than 10 ancient dragons or quasi-ancient dragons, and half of them chose to stand with Kalegos. The other half brazenly launched a fierce attack on the allied army and Duque's weave. On the North Wind Tundra, Gurus Hellscream was galloping wildly on a warg. He raised his axe high and let out a loud battle cry. Ah! This is the life the orcs should have. His words received widespread approval from the surrounding warriors. Yes. In that barren land, even the lowly laborers seemed to be more valuable than us warriors. Thrall saved millions of orcs from that collapsing world. At first, Thrall received countless praises. As time passed, a series of basic problems such as food, clothing, housing, and transportation caused the orcs to be in conflict. Most of the orcs from Draenor Nagrand were not satisfied with the barrenness of the land. They were not satisfied with the fact that the hides they hunted had to be collected by the Alliance in exchange for grains that they did not like. Even the pork of the pigs raised in the pigsty by the Alliance was not chewy and tasted bad. Only the sharp-toothed wild boar was the right way to go. They also handed over the clan's laborers to the tribe and arranged for them to mine in exchange for food. Their poor wisdom could not understand that Great Chief Thrall had to worry about not letting his people starve to death as much as possible. They would only complain about this and that. Until the northern expedition came. Seeing the fertile land in front of them that resembled Nagrand, seeing the heroic beasts, mammoths, long-haired rhinoceroses, giant spiders, killer whales of Dim Light Bay, the mixed Warsong tribe, which was mainly made up of Nagrand's old Warsong tribe orcs, were so excited that they forgot everything else. Most of them had forgotten the original goal of the crusade against the Lich King, and saw this northern expedition as a Warsong tribe's operation to seize territory. The most powerful tribe should have the most fertile territory. That was how they thought. The Alliance's action of minding their own business had indirectly stimulated the Warsong orcs' encirclement movement. Who knew that a nightmare would suddenly come? In the sky, dozens of giant dragons with blue wings and bodies swooped down from the clouds. Most of the orcs were torn to pieces by the violent rain of magic just because they saw the giant shadows looking up. Countless arcane bombs, frost arrows, blizzards. The blue dragons used a magic feast to open the prelude to the massacre. Blue Dragon Irigos, as the strongest supporter of Malygos, directly launched the fiercest attack on the Warsong stronghold. With a spread of his wings, dozens of compound magic arrays arranged like rings of stars suddenly appeared in the void. These magic arrays, which were the size of half a football field, had dragon runes on their surface flickering, making these magic arrays seem to form a bright belt of light. The belt of light emitted the unique purple glow of arcane magic. This light poured down on the Warsong stronghold, causing the extremely orc-style stronghold parts to twist, deform and shatter, turning into countless scattered pieces that flew in all directions. Chapter 1582. In the sky, outside the compound magic formation, there were hundreds of looming veins of various sizes. These symbolized that Eligos was frantically extracting elements from a brand new magic net to support the operation of these powerful magic formations. In fact, he was not the only one benefiting. At this moment, a bright river of arcane light was hanging upside down over the entire Northwind taiga. It floated in the sky where the cold wind howled, like a long river flowing with countless amethyst crystals, emitting a bright light. With its support, the combat power of these blue dragons had more than doubled. The Warsong orcs near the Warsong stronghold suffered a devastating blow. In the midst of the rumbling explosion, many orcs on the sentry towers were blown away with a bang, falling from high places and turning into large red and green meat patties. The unlucky soldiers below the stronghold were either thrown dozens of meters away by the violent explosion and landed heavily on the rugged slope, or had their heads cut in half by a piece of wood. There were also dozens of pieces of wood or iron that pierced through their bodies. They did not turn into corpses on the spot, but they had to suffer for a while before they died. In the wilderness, Garrush had a hard time catching a forgotten mage who was running around. Was a messenger. He grabbed the thin bone by the collar. Where's the Alliance? Didn't those thin guys claim to be our allies? Now their allies have betrayed them. Have they betrayed us too? The forgotten mage was in extreme pain. Although he did not feel any pain, he still struggled hard. Garrush's crude methods embarrassed him. The Sleeping Dragon Temple, the Alliance, and the Horde announced an hour ago that the Blue Dragon King Malygos had been corrupted and was already an enemy. You ran too far, we couldn't find you at all. Garrush was greatly offended. Because this meant that the blame was likely to be on him. He did not regret it because this was a normal hunt for the clan. In Nagrand there had to be at least one such large-scale hunt every week, or the clan would starve. No, Garrush roared hoarsely. This is all the fault of the Alliance. This is a trap. They put us here on purpose to lure us. As expected, despicable outsiders cannot be trusted, Garrush roared. Little did he know that when he vented his anger and roared, he had unintentionally stated at least one truth. The forgotten mage bitterly said, "The Wormrest Temple is not under the Alliance's control. Even Alexstrasza couldn't stop the Blue Dragon King from going crazy and challenging Arthas. This has nothing to do with the Alliance. Moreover, the Alliance was also attacked. He expressed the opinion of the majority. There was nothing wrong with that logic. The Alliance army had a faster reaction time than the Horde because other than the Magic Communication Direct Squadron, the Alliance had many other rapid communication systems. In addition to the spiritual owl communication of the Night Elves, there was also the divine power communication that only the members of the Elun Sisterhood could use. After magical communication became chaotic and intermittent due to Maligos creating a second weave, divine communication became the most effective and fastest method. It was a pity that there were too few female priests who had the ability to use divine power communication. Only high-ranking priests could do so, and they would not be able to use it unless it was a critical moment. What the Alliance was testing was the telegraph. After diesel engines became popular, Duque spent a lot of effort to develop and promote electromagnetic induction generators. It was not difficult to generate electricity by constantly rotating electromagnetic coils. As long as one was in an engineering university, there was no one who couldn't do it. With the advent of electricity, the invention of the telegraph was inevitable. The problem now was the decay of electricity and the problem of heat during the transmission of electricity. High-voltage transmission, then using substations to reduce the voltage back to civilian use. Duque understood the principle, but to put it into practical use, it still required a lot of practice and experiments. At the moment when Duque's weave was being challenged, it was indeed a good time to launch the telegraph system. The closer it was to Maligos' lair, the less efficient Duque's weave was. Of course, the part of the weave that Duque concentrated on protecting was still working well. For example, the two large fulcrum points, Naxxramas and the Fearless Stronghold. The Alliance's communication system did not collapse, and naturally, its defense showed extremely exaggerated efficiency. In the magic mirror, when Duque saw the blue dragons flying from the horizon, he couldn't help but complain, "Who on earth gave them the courage to challenge us?" Then Duque added in a low voice, "I bet it's not Liang Jingru." Seeing the blue baby dragons that were not even baby dragons, Bulang Bronzebeard also sighed. This is definitely a feast for the Dalajan mages. Dragon remains were rare and precious, not to mention the blue dragon scales, fur, and limbs that were rich in magic power. Because of their good relationship with the Sleeping Dragon Temple, except during the second battle of the Dark Portal, when the Red Dragon army was enslaved by the Horde, the Dalajan and Duque ruthlessly plundered a wave of Red Dragon materials. There was no such good opportunity again. Today, a good dragon skin of about 1 square meter could be sold for 10,000 Arather gold coins. After sighing, Bulang said loudly, "Prepare to use the cannons to tell those big lizards that the anger of mortals is too hot for them to bear." Oh, the soldiers below all showed a state of inexplicable excitement. Under the lead of an ancient colossal blue dragon, more than 10 adult blue dragons led hundreds of dragon whelps, as well as close to 10,000 dragon whelps. They spread their wings and rode the strong winds, sweeping over from 10 kilometers away. Although they were still far from the blue dragon's range of attack, the long river of light and shadow of the arcane magic that swayed in the void behind them had already made the soldiers of Naxxramas realize that if they were to judge their attack power based on their size alone, they would definitely suffer. The blue dragons moved faster than expected, and in just a few blinks of an eye, the blue dots on the horizon became bigger. Although they were still out of sight, with the help of the high magnification periscope, the Alliance's gunners could even see the scales on their wings clearly. The deep blue eyes in the eye sockets and the long crisscross dragon teeth made people feel even more uncomfortable. Naxxramas was like this, and the Fearless Fortress was also facing a similar situation. At this time, Duque's voice sounded in the front line of the Alliance army. 23 years ago in the second battle of the Dark Portal, I led your father's generation, a total of 200,000 troops in front of the wall of Thoradin, and it was difficult to move an inch, all because of the rampage of an ancient red dragon. Today, 23 years later, we face an even more exaggerated opponent. But I want to say, with the development of technology, mortals have really set foot on the world stage. We have cannons. We have airships. We have enough power to destroy all evil. So, I hope everyone will give these guys who dare to go against the tide of history a good look. What technology is. All troops, listen to my order, fire in turn. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.